Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I think Justice Alito said this: new technology may provide increased convenience or security at the expense of privacy, and many people may find the trade-off worthwhile. How will we know whether people find the trade-off worthwhile, and who gets to make that decision?
Can I comment on that, Congressman?
Sure.
That's a catchy statement. The problem is when an individual...
Well, it's not my statement.
Well, I know
it's
not
Supreme Court Justice.
I understand that. And my concern with that statement is that because society would, or members of society would be willing to make that trade-off, the individual will be the one who suffers the harm. And I think, again, that's the job. I assume that's one of the reasons why this committee is holding these hearings, is to get a view. And I agree with Congressman Richmond that this body should make a determination of that, because if it's just a matter of, well, what society would prefer or what trade-off society would be willing to make, individuals are going to be the ones who suffer.
So if I remember con law correctly, the Bill of Rights kind of sets the minimum. And if states or this entity perhaps wanted to have a more arduous view of one of the amendments, like the Fourth Amendment, we could do so, right?
Well, I would just caution, because the jurisprudence under City of Bernie versus Flores, as I'm sure members of this committee understand, does not lend itself to Congress going beyond what the Supreme Court has done. That said, however,
well, I thought the Constitution allowed Congress to, in some instances, set the jurisdiction of the courts.
Well, it allows it to set the jurisdiction of the court, but under Section 5, the court has been somewhat restrictive. City of Bernie is the main case, and there have been recent precedents since then, and it will be interesting to see what they do with the case, the Shelby County case. But the court has invalidated several congressional statutes where Congress has imposed on states restrictions that the court has found constitutional.
How does the expenditure of manpower or woman power impact a Fourth Amendment analysis? I can see an analysis where if you had to invest detectives or line officers in surveillance, that's one analysis. And it would be a different analysis than just having a computer do it. Am I dreaming up that the investiture of resources would be part of? I mean, Jason, my friend, love him to death. He's got a bill dealing with GPS tracking. And part of the analysis, I think, is that at least when you're having a person doing it, you're investing time, you're investing resources. That's a different analysis than just having some device do it. So how does that play into it?
Well, I know of no Supreme Court case in which the court has said how much resources or the degree of resources invested makes any difference to the Fourth Amendment question. I know of no Fourth Amendment.
I think there is, but you guys are the experts. The gentleman beside you was shaking his head, probably to agree with you and not with me, but you can go right ahead.
Oh, no. I think I agree with you, Congressman. I think the appropriate place for us to calibrate these expectations is in the legislature, rather than letting judges write things up. This body here is in the best position to know what your constituents expect with regard to privacy, and if we want to control the types of surveillance, be it GPS or geolocation data or whatnot, then Congress can pass legislation to require a warrant before getting that, rather than allowing it to be obtained through a subpoena. I think that's completely appropriate.
Do all of you agree that technology can impact the whether or not a search is considered reasonable?
I mean, I think I can at least partially answer that. The Supreme Court has ruled that if the government uses a large team of agents to literally follow somebody for around, that is not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Whereas the Supreme Court, in the Jones majority, is on record leaving open the question of performing that same tracking with technology may be a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, Justice Alito and 4 other justices think that it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Do you agree, and I know I'm almost out of time, that technology impacts our reasonable expectation of privacy, and that it's a scale that changes from culture or generation to generation?
Well, I think to some extent we are all far more comfortable with the concept of photography than people were in the late 1800s when it first became possible to capture an irrefutably accurate image of somebody at will. And so technology does impact our views of privacy, but it doesn't mean that we don't have privacy.
I would agree with that, Congressman. Technology does affect our Fourth Amendment.
Well, I'm out of time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Calabrese about the issue of the storage of data and its implications for privacy. We know that local police departments are applying to obtain permits from the FAA to use drones for law enforcement purposes. And I understand that there's some potential that a large amount of data could be collected by drones and stored for a very long period of time. I'm concerned that limitless data collection can pose a threat to Americans' privacy. Can you tell us what types of data these drones can collect, and if those law enforcement agencies who acquire drones have data minimization policies in place?
Those are all incredibly good questions, Congresswoman, that don't necessarily have clear answers at this point. Let me try to sketch a few of the parameters out for you. I think that absolutely the widespread collection of detailed information, say HD camera level video, can create huge privacy implications. It really changes the way we consider public space. We don't consider ourselves to be recorded when we're in public. We may be in public but not preserved over time. We can also apply powerful new technologies like face recognition to that detailed video. We can use it to zoom in, for example, or examine particular things that we might not have noticed at the time. In terms of data retention policies, we think those are best practices. We think every police department should limit the amount of collection for particular purposes and discard it after it no longer needs it for those purposes. Whether that's happening now, I think it's tough to say on a local level the particular data collection practices. We certainly hope it'll be something the FAA requires and that all local law enforcement does.
Well, do you think we should require that agencies who use drones have some sort of data minimization policy in place? And
yes.
what kind of policy would be best in terms of considering civilian drone usage?
Yes, I do believe the data minimization policy is vital. I would say that it's bounded by the other reasons for collection. You put a drone up for a particular reason. Once that reason is expired, you have examined the person, you searched the person or followed the person that you're looking into. The case is over. You no longer need it. Discard the data. No, if you don't do any mass surveillance, then you won't have to worry about keeping data for long periods of time.
We have to update many of our other federal laws that deal with electronic communications, but what can we learn from our experiences in dealing with other technologies when it comes to protecting individual privacy?
Well, I think that we have powerful frameworks in place now. I mean, certainly the Privacy Act in itself has all the principles that we believe would apply here. The Privacy Act has some exceptions, but it also is a powerful framework. Clearly, we don't want to discard things like the very strong protections in the Wiretap Act, for example, against listening to people's communications. Those all have to remain in place. I think what we can learn is to articulate, I hope, some of the things that we believe should be in any bill, which is use limitations, collection only for a particular purpose, not converting it to other purposes, discarding it when it's done, notifying people about when their information is being collected and why, and giving them input into that.
Okay. Mr. Villaseñor, I'd like to focus on the positive benefits of drones. As a representative from Southern California, we face many dangerous and costly wildfires each year, and we certainly can benefit from additional tools to fight these fires. For example, the station fire in the Angeles National Forest in my district killed 2 firefighters and burned 160,000 acres, and it was the largest wildfire in the modern history of LA County. Is the FAA Modernization Act helping to accelerate the production of firefighting and prevention drones so that local firefighters can have these tools in the near future? Are there any barriers that warrant any congressional review?
Right. No, I think the FAA is very well aware of the importance of applications like firefighting. And so the FAA, of course, is not itself involved in the production of unmanned aircraft, but is working very diligently and hard on the regulations that are enabling uses such as firefighting that nobody in this room, I'm sure, finds objectionable in the least. And so I think that's moving apace quite well.
Thank you. And I yield the balance of my time to Congressmember Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Calabrese. I just have a simple question. What is the opportunity for racial profiling, and how dangerous is that with the utilization of drones?
We've certainly seen racial profiling in the use of video cameras. It seems logical to believe it might be applied here.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and do appreciate your being here. I'd like to follow up on Ms. Chu's. I think I am curious the line of questioning she had. You know, if you, I'll give an example. There's a doctor friend in Tyler, my hometown, who set his incredible new camera with an incredible new lens skyward and took pictures of a shuttle going over, and then later saw in the news that it had broken up and got that to the paper, didn't sell it, just put it out, and it was the most, it was a photograph that's been on more front pages of publications than any other. On the other hand, if he took that same camera and pointed it in someone's window from a long distance, then you would get an issue. So obviously technology makes a difference, and it seems that we do get into some intent issues. But I'm curious, Mr. Calabrese, you said that there's a lot of law in this area, and I wasn't sure which area you were talking about, but I'm curious if Congress went about setting what we believed, and I think there's a lot of room for agreement on both sides. I appreciated Ms. Bass, Ms. Chu's questions, Mr. Richmond's questions. I think we agree on a great deal in this area. So if we came to an agreement on what we in Congress believed was an appropriate, reasonable expectation of privacy, are you guys aware of law that would create a problem for us setting such an expectation, reasonable expectation of privacy?
No, I don't believe so. I believe you've got a very powerful piece of legislation in front of you right now, H.R. 637, and I think that's a very good beginning on setting the parameters for how drones should be used. I think that's a great place to start. Just to answer your question, in terms of the areas where there's existing law, I was largely talking about private use, so keeping time laws, stuff like that.
Right. Is anybody aware of laws that would be adverse to us trying to set a reasonable expectation of privacy?
I'm not aware of that, but I would just urge some caution here, Congressman, in that the courts have had decades to try and define reasonable expectation of privacy.
It's a difficult area.
I think you might be better served by focusing on the government conduct that you want to control, defining terms like search and public place and whatnot, and controlling, focusing your legislation there rather than trying to define privacy. What's a reasonable expectation of privacy in New York City is very different than what it might be somewhere else.
Sure, but if you, Ms. Bass was pointing out, she has a lot of paparazzi. In East Texas, we don't have that much paparazzi, but her concern is still my concern. It's not just public government entities, but if you have a nosy neighbor that has that telescope and points it to your backyard or inside your house instead of skyward, there ought to be some point that you can expect privacy, right?
Sure, and I think that, so focusing again on the conduct that we would want to control, it would be the either the collection of that information by a private party or the subsequent use of that information. And so, if sometimes you walk down the street at night in Georgetown and people leave their blinds open, you can see the family houses and whatnot. That's not something that they might feel their privacy is violated, but it's not something that we would want to legislate.
Exactly.
But if we start snapping photos and using them, then maybe the use of that information internal to the home is the thing that we'd want to control.
Congressman, I would just say this. There is one example of this in the mid-'70s in United States versus Miller. The Supreme Court said we don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy with respect to our banking records. Congress passed legislation in which effectively reverse that ruling and gave individuals more privacy.
That's a good point.
In this
Let
area.
me ask this real quick as my time's running out. Is anybody aware of any laws that would prohibit you shooting down a drone in an area in which you were allowed to shoot? I had this question come up with somebody. If it's over your airspace or your home and it's a private, not a government drone.
I think it would be a very bad idea because...
No, I'm just asking if there are any laws. I mean, I had a guy from Georgia say, hey, we need at least 50 rounds because that's about how many it takes to bring down a drone.
If someone did it and ended up hurting someone else, they could be charged with reckless discharge.
No, I understand that, but specifically to take, can you shoot down a drone over your property?
Fortunately, the gentleman's time has expired.
Well, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, since you normally allow people to answer questions that were already asked.
Okay. All members of the subcommittee either having used or yielded their time, those who have been present, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.